Shiviti Adonai lenegdi tamid ki mimini volemot lachen samach libi vayagel kvodi af besari yishkon levetach ki lo Lo titain chasid chalin rot shachat tudieni orach chayim so vasemachot et Neimot vemin chanetzach Shiviti Adonai lenegdi tamid ki mimini volemot.
Psalm 16, I have set the eternal always before me. God is at my side, I shall not be moved. Therefore does my heart exult and my soul rejoice. My being is secure, for you will not abandon me to death, nor let your faithful ones see destruction. You show me the path of life. Your presence brings a fullness of joy. Enduring happiness is your gift. It's a powerful moment that we share together as we celebrate Alan's life. None of us have lived in a world without Alan. None of us can really imagine the entire scope of the world that he saw, the changes that have been experienced in his 101 years, 101 and a half, let's give it to him. But we know the ways that he's touched our lives. And this day, this moment is a time to hear from some of those stories, hear those expressions and reflections, and for each of us to reflect on our own interactions and the ways that Alan influenced and improved our lives. Death has taken our beloved Alan Sanford Rosenfeld. Our friends grieve in their darkened world. In their silence there's lamentation. In their tears there is loneliness. Lost in their sorrow may they find the presence of loving friends. Hear them, O God, be with them. For Alan's love that united us in life in which death cannot sever, for his companionship that we shared along life's path, and which continues through the tenderness of memory, for the gifts of his heart and mind that brought us joy and happiness, all is now a precious remembrance. For these and more, we give our thanks to God. In this time of grief, we listen to the voice of our sacred scriptures that brings us the ever-new message of God's nearness. It tells us of our kinship with the Creator, in light as in darkness, in joy as in sorrow, in life as in death. Happy are those who have not followed the counsel of the wicked or taken the path of sinners or joined the company of the insolent. Rather, the teaching of God is their delight. They study that teaching day and night. They are like a tree planted beside streams of water that yield its fruit in season. Its foliage never fades, whose fruit always flourishes. O God, you have been our refuge in every generation. Before the mountains came into being, before you brought forth the earth and the world, from eternity to eternity, you are God. As for us, you turn us to repentance and say, "Return, you mortals." The days of our years are 70, or by reason of strength 80 years. But 1,000 years in God's sight are but as yesterday when it is past, or as a watch in the night. Teach us therefore to number our days that we may attain a heart of wisdom. And may your favor, O God, be upon us. Establish the work of our hands, that it may long endure. These words of Psalms have offered us comfort throughout the generations, none quite as precious as the 23rd Psalm, Adonai ro'i lo echsar, binodeshe yarbitzeni, amemenuchot yenahaleni. I invite you to say with me, the Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want. He maketh me to lie down in green pastures. He leadeth me beside the still waters. He restoreth my soul. He guideth me in straight paths for his name's sake. Yea, though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil, for thou art with me. Thy rod and thy staff, they comfort me. Thou preparest a table before me in the presence of mine enemies. Thou hast anointed my head with oil. My cup runneth over. Surely goodness and mercy shall follow me all the days of my life, and I shall dwell in the house of the Lord forever. O God, what are we that you have regard for us? What are we that you are mindful of us? We are like a breath. Our days are as a passing shadow. We come and go like grass, which in the morning shoots up renewed, and in the evening fades and withers. You cause us to revert to dust, saying, "Return, O mortal creatures. Would that we were wise, that we understood whither we are going. For when we die, we carry nothing away. Our glory does not accompany us. Mark the wholehearted. Behold the upright. They shall have peace, O God. For you redeem the soul of your servants, and none who trust in you shall be desolate. Kohelet, Ecclesiastes wrote, "The eye never has its fill of seeing. Young or old, those who depart this life never see enough of the world, never complete their task, never cherish their loved ones enough before they are called home. How they yearn for yet another respite from the final summons. How we yearn to have them close to us for yet another challenge in our lives, yet another joy, yet another precious moment together. O God, be now with those whose hearts are broken, because whenever parting comes, it comes too soon. Console them at this hour. Be near to them when light seems distant. Sustain them, O God, until the time of healing." Ecclesiastes also reminded us of the seasons of life, that there is a time and a season for each. And we recognize in this moment, L'Kol Zman, for everything there is a season, a time for every experience under heaven.
לכל זמן ואת לכל חפץ תחת השמיים ledet vi et la mot, et la tat, et la koina tua, et la rug et lipo, et li fruts et li fnot. La kolsman vet le hulchefets tahata shamayim. La kolsman vet le hulchefets tahat hashamayim. A time for birth and a time for death, a time to plant and a time to uproot the planted, a time to heal, a time to kill, a time to tear, and a time to build. La Kosman viet lechol chefetz tahat hashamayim.
In his sorrow, Job cried out, Ananatan, Adonai lakach, Yehishem Adonai mevorach. God has given, and God has taken away. Blessed be the name of God. Let's take a moment of quiet remembrance, each of us, to bring Alan to mind in our own way. Into your care, O God, we entrust the spirit of Alan Sanford Rosenfeld, for you keep faith with your children in death as in life. Sustain us, that we may meet with serenity the mysteries that lie ahead, knowing that when we walk through the valley of the shadow of death, you, O God, are with us, a loving friend in whom we put our trust. You are the light of our life, our hope in eternity. And we say, Amen.
He said a century of life is no small thing. And to live 101 years is a gift, but to live every one of those years with meaning, with purpose, with love, that is a legacy. Alan Rosenfeld did not simply exist, he thrived. He filled his days with family, community, service, and learning. He understood that life is not measured in years alone, but in the impact that we have on others. And by that measure, his life was truly full. He was a man who not only witnessed history, but actively shaped the world around him. Alan was a son, a husband, a father, a grandfather, a great-grandfather, a cousin, an uncle, a friend, a pillar of the community. He was a man of deep integrity, unwavering kindness, and quiet but steadfast commitment to making the world better. Pirkei Avot, the ethics of our ancestors, teaches who is honored, the one who honors others. Alan honored others not just in his words, but in the way he lived every day. Alan's story begins with a legacy of resilience and adventure. His grandfather, Saul Rosenfeld, journeyed west during the 1860s, drawn by the opportunities of the gold rush, eventually establishing roots in Portland. Alan was born in 1923, the youngest son of Ruth and Dr. Arthur Rosenfeld. He grew up in southwest Portland alongside his siblings, Helen and Edward, attending Ainsworth Grade School and Lincoln High School before beginning his studies at Stanford University. However, his education was interrupted when duty called, and he served his country with distinction in the Army Air Corps as a bombardier during World War II. After the war, he completed his degree in chemical engineering at the University of Washington. But while Alan had a keen intellect and a sharp analytical mind, his true brilliance was in the way that he engaged with people, with warmth, with respect, with an unbiting belief that what matters most in life is not what you have, but by what you give. Alan built a career as an engineer at Crown Zellerbach Corporation, but his greatest source of fulfillment came not from his professional success, but from his life he built with his beloved wife, Eve. They were married for over 71 years, a partnership built on love, laughter, mutual respect, and a shared dedication to family. Alan and Eve first met at a wedding, and he wanted to take her on a date, but Eve was headed off to graduate school in New York, so it wasn't until almost 2 years later when they were reacquainted at a party that Gerald Blauer, or maybe Gerald's parents, had organized, as I heard a few moments ago, for younger people in Portland. 8 months later, Alan proposed, and they were married the following summer. Their marriage blossomed, leading to a beautiful life together in Portland. Together, they raised 4 children, David, Lynn, Sally, and Janice, instilling in them the same values that guided Alan's own life: integrity, hard work, kindness, and service to others. Alan was a devoted father. He was not going to miss a weekend adventure or a family vacation, whether it was a picnic after religious school, going swimming, or Sunday night popcorn. He was deeply involved in his children's lives. He taught them how to fish and camp. He loved scouting adventures and becoming a scoutmaster with David. He encouraged and supported each of his children's unique paths. He adored his grandchildren and took immense pride in their accomplishments, celebrating every milestone with joy and love. And then his heart expanded even more with the births of his great-grandchildren. Even in his later years, after the painful loss of his son David, Alan remained a source of strength and wisdom, showing his family how to navigate life's challenges with grace and resilience. Alan was not just devoted to his own family. His legacy extends far beyond. He believed deeply in service and giving back. He always had a volunteer job, whether through the Junior Chamber of Commerce when he was younger, the American Cancer Society, the Jewish Federation, the Jewish Community Center, or Temple. He dedicated himself to countless volunteer efforts, giving his time and energy. But perhaps most meaningful was his longtime commitment to Meals on Wheels and Loaves and Fishes, where he personally ensured that countless people had access to warm meals and companionship. Whether serving on boards, delivering meals, or simply showing up for those in need, Alan exemplified what it means to be a mensch, a person of honor, kindness, and generosity. Alan understood that community is built not just on words, but through action. He was integral part of Temple Beth Israel in our history. Alan's grandfather was one of the founding members of our community, and Alan carried on that legacy by serving on the Board of Trustees. He believed in the importance of Jewish communal life, not just as cultural and religious tradition, but as responsibility. He was a proud, long-time usher in this space, and also a maintainer of the infamous Purim Carnival Games. And because the Reform movement and Temple didn't do bar mitzvahs when Alan was growing up, he became a bar mitzvah on this bima in his 80s, studying with Cantor Schiff, as age was never a deterrent for Alan. But one of my favorite stories that I learned is that Alan was a self-appointed crossing guard for religious school. He thought the intersection at Gleason and 20th was too dangerous, so he took it upon himself to ensure everyone's safety before and after school, much to his children's chagrin. Alan was not only one of our oldest members, he was also one of our longest members, holding his own membership, not with his parents, since before he was married. One of the great joys of Alan's life was music. From a young age, he played the violin, and throughout his life, music remained a constant source of inspiration and connection. He surrounded himself with talented musicians, whether organizing something musical for the JCC or the anniversary of the temple. Alan always took the opportunity to play with fabulous musicians. Later in life, his love of music found an outlet in volunteer work, where he brought musical therapy to those in need, providing emotional and spiritual healing that only music can offer. Perhaps what made Alan truly extraordinary was the way he approached life, with curiosity, with humor, with an unyielding belief in the power of goodness. He lived every day with purpose, never taking his time on this earth for granted. This was a man who took up competitive running in his 60s. He taught us through his actions that a life well lived is one filled with determination and dedication to others. He reminded us that kindness is strength. Alan's passing leaves a void that cannot be filled, but his legacy endures in the love he shared, the lives he touched, the example that he set for all of us. May his memory be a blessing. May we honor him not just with our words today, but by living as he did, caring for others, giving back, living life to the fullest with an unwavering commitment to making the world a better place. Who is honored? The one who honors others. Alan Rosenfeld lived 101 and a half remarkable years, but his impact will last far beyond that. Zichrono livracha, may his memory be a blessing. We say, amen. Now we're going to hear from several family members. We'll begin with a few grandchildren. So speaking on behalf of Josh, we're going to invite up Janice and Bruce, and then Garrett.
Some of my earliest memories with Poppy were fishing in this small pond in eastern Portland on the way to Mount Hood. I still have some vague recollection of the lake's landscape and watching Poppy cast his line into the pond. There was a small wooden picnic table by the pond, and after casting for a couple of hours, we'd sit at the table, eat sandwiches together, and talk about fishing. He was very skilled with the line, and I remember seeing him gut the fish and preserve it in a bucket of water. Unfortunately, this was before my palate grew to like fish, but it was very nice to see our catch cooked. Flash forward many years later, and several of us would spend one afternoon with him each trip in Sun River by fishing in a river at the edge of town. Needless to say, we were not nearly as successful catching fish. I think we caught 1 or 2 fish in 2 trips, but sharing the experience of one of Poppy's passions with him was a bigger catch than any fish we could have caught. Since I first fished with Poppy, I attribute my enjoyment and learning of fishing to him. When Bruce, Ross, and I went to Alaska a couple of summers ago, I attribute my contribution to our fish to learning from Poppy. Poppy also had a passion for plants and gardening. When he and Nanny lived in the apartment on Kings Hill, right by Goose Hollow, he had a set of plants on their deck, and we would water them in the mornings. He had a wide variety of flowers, and even a tomato plant, which we'd taste even before they were ripe. He was always interested in the plant's progress, so much so, it was one of the first things he'd do in the morning. I also remember these wind chimes and a bird feeder he had on the deck. Kings Hill did not have high wind speeds, so it made the wind chimes pleasant to hear on a quiet day without becoming too loud. When we saw a bird, it drew our attention, and it gave him joy to see the birds. When he and Nanny moved to the Rose Schnitzer, he took the bird feeder and a few plants for their small patio. It says a lot. He kept these porch features with him. While I never recall seeing Poppy play in concert, I knew he was an excellent musician and violinist. I heard him play the violin a few times, and it was quite literally music to my ears. When I first started my orchestra elective rotation in the 5th grade, I thought of him when I chose the violin. He even let me play his violin once when I was learning how to play an orchestra class. Beyond the violin, he knew about tempo, scales, to the point where he could determine the correct pitch for different instruments' notes. I remember this from when he helped me audition a piece for my middle school's top band. I brought my stand, sheet music, and my French horn to the backyard porch at my mom's old house on Stratford, and he sat by me for almost an hour, giving me plenty of help. His attention and connection to the details of music is a great parallel to his attention to life and all of us who are lucky to be part of it. As I look at more of my early memories with Poppy, helping him and Nanny with Meals on Wheels stands out too. We would drive to downtown Portland to pick up the meals and drive them to various houses and apartments in Portland and further west of downtown. Poppy was always happy to let me knock on doors and give meals to everyone on the route. And it was a great feeling to perform a mitzvah together. I could tell Meals on Wheels was another passion of his, and it inspired me to make Dallas Meals on Wheels my mitzvah project for my bar mitzvah. Then it was my mom who was driving me to the houses and apartments, but I still saw the little boy in me taking meals to the front door, just like I did with Poppy. The Torah mentions the commandments to perform mitzvot, and Poppy followed that to the T. It rubbed off on me, including when I volunteered with cats in Colorado Springs and worked in the food pantry with my mom last summer before I could return to my job. I would be remiss if I didn't mention Poppy's passion for the Portland Trail Blazers and the Oregon Ducks. When the college football season started, Poppy would always want to check the scores and turn on the Ducks. I remember seeing some Ducks games at the Park Place apartment and in the Rose Schnitzer, the latter of which I think we saw a game where the Ducks were ahead by 30 or 40 points. He followed the games very well, including talking about the last play or wondering why a penalty wasn't called. Poppy also followed the Trailblazers closely and remained a loyal fan, whether it was Stu Inman drafting Sam Bowie over Michael Jordan in 1984, the Jailblazers, and the Greg Oden and LaMarcus Aldridge era, the Blazers' rise with Brandon Roy, or the Damian Lillard, C.J. McCollum tandem. I remember him being excited when the only Israeli player, Denny Avdija, was traded to Portland last summer. Even in their rebuild phase, Poppy was still following the Trailblazers, a great example of his commitment to things he loved. I'm incredibly thankful I had many years with Poppy to build all these memories with him. He had a great outlook on life and brought so much positivity in all of our lives, and I certainly feel that in mine. I already miss him a lot, but I know his impact will last forever in me.
And that's from Josh Cowell.
Just wanted to thank everybody for coming. I know Poppy, Alan would have found this very special. My name's Garrett, and I'm one of Poppy's grandchildren. And I'm just going to share a few things that I took away from Poppy's life. I'd always known that he had served in World War II, but I don't think I really grasped what exactly that meant until I had the pleasure of visiting the Evergreen Aviation Museum down in McMinnville with my grandmother, and my mother about maybe 10, 15 years ago. And when we went to the museum, there was a model B-17, which was the plane that he flew in. The docent didn't usually let people go in, but since Poppy had flown in it, he let the four of us actually take a look inside. And we got to see, there was a catwalk not more than a couple feet wide over where the bomb bay doors opened. And Alan explained that during one mission, they had opened the bomb bay doors over the English Channel, but they wouldn't close, so he had to crawl out on this very narrow catwalk, tens of thousands of feet high, and manually crank closed the doors so they could continue the mission. And to me, this seemed like an absolutely terrifying experience, but he was relatively nonchalant about it. I don't think he even necessarily saw it as anything special. He just saw it as something that he had to do in order to complete the mission. And then I remember years later, I visited the World War II Museum in New Orleans with him, and he was really given a hero's welcome there. The museum staff let him in for free, comped his lunch, gave him a special tour of the museum, and I think they and I know I always saw him as a hero. I don't actually think he saw himself that way. I think he just saw this as something that he needed, that there was a call for service, and he answered, and it was just something that needed to be done. Another takeaway that I had from him is Rabbi Joseph mentioned he never had a bar mitzvah growing up, but decided to become a bar mitzvah in his mid-80s. I know for anyone who's gone through the process of a bar bat mitzvah, it's not easy for anyone, but especially in your mid-80s. But Poppy, he was never someone who would let things difficult stop him. He was someone who was committed to lifelong learning and improvement, and that's something I'm going to try to take away in my life as well, to honor his legacy. That and to not do things for glory or to be seen as a hero, but to answer the call for service even when things seem daunting or, in many cases, terrifying, to just try to instill some of his bravery in me. Thank you.
Now we invite Janice Schleifer-Rosenfeld, daughter-in-law, and then daughter Lynn, and then Sally and Don Lockman.
I'm Janice Schleifer-Rosenfeld, and I was married to Alan and Eve's firstborn, David. I've been referred to as Janice Sr., the other Janice, Janice from Portland, from Lake Oswego, and everything else in between. When we sat at the dinner table, it was two of us going, "What?" The very first time David brought me to meet his family, I was terrified. Not only did I have to meet his parents, but I had to meet three sisters, and one had the same name. For some reason, David and I traveled in opposite Jewish circles. We never crossed paths, so I didn't know the Rosenfeld family. As you can expect, Eve greeted me warmly and said, "So very pleased to meet you, Janice." Lynn, Sally, and Janice were amazing. They were chatty, and they just were so inclusive with me. And then there was Alan, with his big smile and his rosy cheeks, and he said, "Welcome." 44 years later, he would still greet me with his rosy cheek smile, and I have never felt anything but welcomed. David adored his father, and it was mutual. Endless discussions about the NBA, the MLB, the NFL, tennis. Then we'd move on to college football, college basketball, and then finally high school football, being Lincoln or Lake Oswego. David learned the art of giving back to the community, helping his dad lug very heavy books each year to the Jewish Community Center book sale. And of course, as everybody will say, we all did Meals on Wheels with Poppy. David was so supportive of me when I would dash off to countless meetings for Women's Division of Jewish Federation and endless PTA meetings where I was a PTA president for Aaron and Kelly's elementary school. Many, many auctions I worked on supporting Oak Creek, Lake Oswego High School, and Neva Shalom. The amount of volunteer hours that I would put in were endless. When Rabbi Stanford eulogized David, he talked about the quiet, supportive force he was behind me. A skill David had mastered because he had Dad as a father, because Alan taught him that. When we had our first child, we were 100% convinced it would be a boy, down to his name Dan Rosenfeld and a blue and white nursery. Auntie Sally happened to be in town during her residency, and she was in the room during the birth. And she was down there when she announced, "It's a girl." Dave and I probably took pause, and then we embraced a baby girl, Erin. 3 years later, same kind of thing happened. All prepared for that boy, and then Kelly was born. David had solidified being the perfect girl dad. All the warmth, love, and generosity David provided his girls, and there was a lot, was because of his father, the perfect mentor. After David passed away, it was a hard time. For a teeny tiny split second, I wondered, what place do the girls and I have in the family? Alan pulled me aside in his quiet, self-assured way, told me that he and Eve would always support us. He would be there for us, and he would love us unconditionally. Alan and Eve have always considered me Janice, the other daughter. When I started dating Paul Schlesingers, the tables were turned. I was the one bringing someone to the family dinner table. I didn't need to worry. Alan and Eve knew Paul. They knew Paul longer than they knew me. And Eve was distantly related to Paul. Immediately, Paul bonded with Alan over tomatoes growing in pots and gardening with pots. They were living in the condo at that time. When Paul read Don Lockman's book, he helped me prepare with maps and visual aids so that Dad could become a guest speaker at my book club. He was a smash. He was an instant hit. He was somebody we will remember with all of us in our book club. Alan walked Erin down the aisle here at Beth Israel. He walked with Eve down the aisle for Kelly, and he welcomed 5 great-grandchildren. I was so privileged to call him Dad. I'd like to close with an excerpt from a poem called We Remember Them by Sylvan Kamens and Rabbi Jack Reimer. When we were weary and in need of strength, we remember them. When we are lost and sick at heart, we remember them. When we have decisions that are difficult to make, we remember them. When we have joy we crave to share, we remember them. When we have achievements that are based on theirs, we remember them. For as long as we live, they too will live. For they are now a part of us. We remember them.
For those of you that don't know me, I'm Lynn Langfeld, the California daughter, as my mother refers to me, and the oldest of Alan and Eve's daughters. I would like to share a few of the things over which Dad and I bonded. You've already heard mentioned that Dad enjoyed fishing and that he loved for us to go with them. While it was not the favorite activity of my siblings, felt like they were forced to go, I actually enjoyed it and continued to fish when the opportunity has arisen throughout my life. My father and I both had a passion for fitness. We enjoyed running, and when Dad learned of an opportunity to participate in a running event, he would call me and say, "Are you going to do the run on Sunday?" They were always on a Sunday morning. Since I was working at the time, and the weekends were my time to sleep in, I would reluctantly say, "Okay." But when I'd get there and see him and his sister Helen, who was also very much into running, I'd know that I had made the right decision. We would bond together at the beginning, make some trips to the bathroom, and then congratulate each other at the end. Dad was competitive. He continued doing these runs into his 80s, as was already mentioned, and was happy when he would move up into a higher age group. As you move up in age, there were fewer people to compete with, thus a greater chance of winning. He was proud of the many trophies, medals, and plaques that he won. When he could no longer run, he continued staying active by riding a stationary bike and lifting weights. I accompanied him many times to the Jewish Community Center and to Friendly House to work out. When the pandemic hit, I didn't want him to have to give up his exercise program. I felt it was important that both he and my mother keep moving. Therefore, I set up a twice-weekly Zoom class with them to do exercise. In addition to keeping both he and my mother active and providing some socialization as the class grew in size, it got them familiar with using Zoom and other online tools to connect to family and activities during the time of isolation. Believe me, this was not the easiest thing for them to learn, but Dad was actually quite good at technology. Mom, not quite so good, but with repetition and step-by-step guidance, she is now doing fine. Through Zoom, we were able to have a couple of family Zoom seders and remote birthday celebrations. In addition, there are online activities that began during the pandemic and have continued, including participating online in Beth Israel Shabbat services every week, saying the prayers, and Dad, of course, singing along. When things began opening up again, I continued the Zoom classes. I relished this because it provided me with the opportunity to connect and visit with them. Since living in California, I could not always be there in person. We would stay on after class was over to visit and update each other on what was going on in our lives. My father continued coming to class even within a week or so of his passing because, as I mentioned, fitness was very important to him. He was always aware of what days we had class. He would tell Mom, "It's Wednesday, we have Lynn today." He would insist on wearing the same old worn-out shirt and be there ready to go with his recliner adjusted to face the computer screen. Although I would tell him, "Dad, you would be able to exercise much easier if you'd sit in the wheelchair rather than the recliner," he'd insist on staying in the recliner. He would transfer to the wheelchair, however, and even to a regular chair for Fernando's class, which was a class that he also regularly attended at the Rosenfeld. He was dedicated to that. But for my class, he insisted that he stay in the recliner. Once he had his mind made up about things or developed a habit, he was stubborn and would not change. That was one of his traits. He was very stubborn. I was fortunate enough to be able to be with him almost continuously over these past few weeks. One morning when I was alone with him and I thought he was sleeping, I decided to do some stretching and a little bit of movement. After a few minutes, I looked over at him and he was following me, raising his arms up and down. I seized the moment and we had our own little private exercise session together. Another evening, Mom, Sally, and I were watching a documentary about the first woman to join the New York Philharmonic. Again, we thought he was sleeping, but all of a sudden he had his arms raised and he was conducting the music that was playing on the TV. As was mentioned, Dad was a dedicated Portland Trailblazer fan and he loved family. I mention these two things together because during the past few weeks of his life, he would rally to stay awake to watch his beloved Trailblazers or for a visit from his grand and great-grandchildren. His face would light up when those adorable greats came to visit and came into the room. During one of the good nights I had with him, he called out Marshall, which is my husband, then asked, "Marshall will take care of the taxes?" I reassured him that Marshall was on top of the taxes. Financial matters were something that he worried about, and he wanted to make sure that they got done, even in his last few weeks. It was only within the past few years that he finally trusted Marshall to do the taxes. Before that, he would print out all the forms, lay them out on the bed, handwrite all of the numbers in, and it took him months. Our family has always been close, bonds tight, and the feeling of love there. However, we were not a family that expressed this very often physically or through words. I made it a goal of mine to change this and began saying I love you at the end of our phone calls, Zoom sessions, and when I'd leave after a visit. I think Dad had been waiting for this opportunity to open up. There was definitely a change in Dad's display of his family love the past few years. He would bless us and tell us he loved us at the end of every visit. Every night at bedtime, Dad would hold Mom's hand and tell her he loved her. He wanted to make sure, and he had asked us that we take care of Mom. In closing, I want to express how fortunate I am to have had such a wonderful father and role model in my life for 68 years, and that I was able to share these last few precious weeks with him. I love you, Dad, and I miss you already.
I want to take this opportunity on behalf of our family to thank all who have kindly cared for Dad and all of our family, especially in the past few weeks. Dad's caregivers who have been wonderful and who we consider part of our family now. The clergy and the CBI community, Rose Schnitzer Manor, the residents and the staff, Dad's hospice team, and friends and extended family. So this is Don Lockman, Dad's nephew and our cousin, and he will be sharing about Dad's military history, some of which you've heard a little bit about, but Don will be sharing in a little more detail. I have a few things to share to add to that story. As you've already heard, and you'll hear again from Don, it was not until recent years that we learned the details of Dad's service. Dad had secretly recorded, and against regulations, military regulations, the details of the missions that he flew during World War II, writing on the inner wrappings of lifesavers, and then storing those papers in the outer colorful cover that would come on a lifesaver roll. On a family trip to Sun River, he pulled out a lifesaver package and then removed the inside where he had written the recordings. And he began to tell us some of the details that we had not previously heard. Another early memory, or an early memory from my childhood about Dad's military service, was that on a weekly basis in the evening, he would dress to go to his reserve meetings. In his officer's uniform, he looked very formal and very official and handsome. In his dresser, there was a container of shiny and colorful pins and badges from his service. On occasions, my siblings and I would sneak these out of the dresser, his private space, to admire. We probably had some idea that these were of some significance and importance, but we certainly did not know the details. There's only one story that I remember from my childhood and early adulthood that Dad shared with us about his military experience, and it was a sad story. His good friend, who he had been with through training, the navigator on his plane, died during their first mission due to a failure of his oxygen tank. Dad said that after returning to the base that night, he cried all night long. That was the only story that I remember hearing. So now I'm going to let Dawn fill in some of the details.
Thank you, Sally. Good afternoon. My name is Don Lockman. Alan Rosenfeld was my uncle, and Sally has asked me to say a few words today. All of you here today knew Alan. You knew Alan as a gentle soul, a cerebral man, the chemical engineer, the talented violinist, the man who gave generously of his time to charitable activities. But I would guess a much smaller number of you knew Major Alan Rosenfeld, the bombardier. Like many of his generation, Alan fought in World War II. And for nearly 70 years, Alan would not speak of his combat experience. If asked, and I did a number of times, he would politely eschew the question by simply saying, "We were a replacement crew." Then about 15 years ago, precipitated by what I would have considered a totally unrelated event, Alan began to tell his story. The event was my mother's 85th birthday, which was in April. I had rented a limousine to take the family wine tasting. As we were in the neighborhood, I had the limo stop at the Evergreen Aviation Museum. Amongst the static exhibits was a B-17 Model G, the same model in which Alan flew 34 missions during World War II. Apparently, it wasn't long before Alan brought his family down to see the B-17 and climbed through the interior of the plane. Now, the Rosenfelds traditionally had two gatherings each year, Thanksgiving and Mother's Day. I was enjoying a sandwich at the Mother's Day gathering, which was a month after my mother's birthday, when I overheard Alan telling someone, "We came over Hamburg the wrong way and we were sitting ducks." I was stunned by what I had just heard. The next day, Sally called me saying, "Dad brought out his lifesaver wrappers. You need to write this down." Lifesaver wrappers? Alan, contrary to the rules, had written a brief synopsis of each mission on small pieces of paper and secreted them in lifesaver wrappers, 34 of them. Over the next 18 months, I was privileged to spend time with Alan, writing the history of his combat experience and how his crew contributed to the overall success of the 8th Air Force aerial bombing campaign over occupied Europe. When we first began a discussion of the project, Alan wanted to fictionalize the story, changing names and places. He did, however, share the number of his bomb group and squadron. I went out on the internet and found the bomb group historians, one of whom is a major general in the Royal Netherlands Army. I contacted the gentleman and mentioned my uncle Alan Rosenfeld was in the 487th Bombardment Group. He wrote back, "Yes, of course, Lieutenant Alan Rosenfeld, the bombardier on Lieutenant Klein's crew." How did he know that? There were approximately 3,000 airmen in the 487th. The answer, the tail gunner on Lieutenant Klein's crew kept a diary, which was in the possession of the general. The diary mentioned Alan multiple times. After a month of research, I gleaned enough information to fill a 3-inch binder. There were photos of Lieutenant Klein's crew that Alan had never seen before. The cat was out of the bag. There was no reason to fictionalize Alan's 34 missions. Alan was a sophomore at Stanford University and in the ROTC program when Pearl Harbor was attacked. In April of 1943, Alan transferred to the Army Air Force, and after extensive training, Alan flew his first mission on December 30th, 1944. Sally alluded to that. His final mission was flown on April 19th, 1945. The 8th Air Force only flew 2 more missions prior to the end of the war in Europe. Alan Rosenfeld was just 21 years of age at the time. A few minutes ago, I mentioned Alan's comment about flying over Hamburg. This is how he described the experience on the paper secreted in Lifesaver Wrapper number 2. Altitude, 24,500 feet. Temperature, minus 46 degrees Celsius. Target, clear. Due to a delay on the runway, our plane took off too late to join our group. Our base commander told us to tack onto the rear of another group, and that turned out to be the 100th bomb group. From an early violation of international surrender law, this group was frequently targeted, resulting in having a disproportionate number of its planes shot down. Usually the bomb run is with a tailwind, which can add 50 to 70 miles per hour ground speed to the run. This means less time for anti-aircraft fire. But for some reason, the lead pilot took our flight with a headwind, putting us in the target area twice as long. The result was a loss of 9 planes in our flight. That's 9 out of 12. Brutal, seeing them on fire and spiraling down. Saw a few parachutes. 2 of the planes were off our wing. Our plane had a hole in the nose and our bomb bay doors were stuck open. There were also about 25 German F-190 fighters in the area attacking planes that day. I found out later that their group, referring to the 100th Bomb Group, lost 12 planes that day. I also found out that one of their pilots, who was one of my best friends in high school, was lost. The target area and oil refinery were on fire. This was Alan's second mission. He lived through 32 more. Sally asked that I share Alan's 12th mission. Target, Frankfurt. Alan wrote, "We were in a new plane, broken clouds but open near target, met moderate but accurate flak aimed at our ship, heard 6 bursts, 3 of which hit our ship. The concussion knocked the navigator and a waist gunner down. Flak hit number 1 and number 4 engines, and both were lost. We were losing altitude in a slow path toward friendly territory, and we had a U.S. P-51 fighter escort us part way out. Our navigator located an airfield in Reims, France, which looked like a safe place to head for. We broke out of a cloud cover over Reims, and the plane was on a collision course with its famous Gothic cathedral. Our pilot miraculously dodged the cathedral, and we found an abandoned German airfield for landing. Assessment of the damage showed we had 45 hits, with holes in the wings. There was an oil leak causing the shutdown of number 1 engine. Number 4 engine was shut down by damage, 2 holes in the nose, a hole in the gas tank, a ruptured oxygen tank under the flight deck, and damage to a control cable. What a miracle there were no injuries and the plane sustained this amount of damage. That's why B-17s are called flying fortresses." So, while we remember Alan, the gentle soul, the cerebral man, the talented violinist, the man who gave so generously of his time to charitable activities, we should also acknowledge Alan for his courage, his fortitude, and his acts of bravery, which he kept secret for so many years.
Thank you for sharing those stories and all of the heartfelt memories. Makes us want to sit down with Alan and hear some more stories. But that's our responsibility now, to hear these stories, to share them, to bring back a memory of a very different age, and to keep that alive and the lessons learned. There are, I think, in this room, so many stories that can be shared. And we'll invite you to do that. Immediately following the service, we'll have a reception in Goodman Hall across the street, a chance to talk among ourselves and hold on to some of these beautiful memories. There will also be a Shiva service Tuesday evening at 7 o'clock at Cedars-Sinai Park in Zidell Hall. And we invite anyone who would like to be a part of that service to join us as well. If you're comfortable doing so, I invite you to please rise. We will hear the words of El Malei Rachamim, prayer that calls on God to wrap up the soul of our loved one in God's sheltering wings.
Il Malei Rachamim, Shochein b'meromim, Hamsei menucha nechona, Tachat kanfei hashchina, Im kedoshim utorim, Ki zoharakia mazeirim, Et nishmat Aharon ben Avraham, Shehalach ne'olamo, Ba'al harachamim, Yastirehu beseter knafav le'olamim, V'yitzror bitziror, Achayim et nishmato. Adonai hu nachlato, v'yanuach b'shalom, b'shalom al mishkavo,
Compassionate God, eternal Spirit of the universe, grant perfect rest in your sheltering presence to Alan Sanford Rosenfeld, who has entered eternity. O God of mercy, let him find refuge in the shadow of your wings, and let his soul be bound up in the bond of everlasting life. God is his inheritance. May he rest in peace. And we say,
Amen.
we say together the words of Kaddish. Yitgadal v'yitgadash shmei Rabbah, be'alma divrach irutei v'yamlich malchutei, b'chayechon uv'yomechon, v'chayei d'chol beit Yisrael, ba'agala v'zman kariv v'imru. Amen. Yehei shlemei Rabbah mevorach le'olam umei almaya. Yitbarach v'yishtabach v'yitpa'ar v'yitromam v'yitnaseh. V'yitadar v'yitalev v'yitalal shemei dekudusha b'richu. Le'elam in kol birchata v'shirata, tushbechata v'nechemata, da'amiran be'alma v'imru. Amen. Yehei shlam araba min shmaya, v'chayim aleinu ve'al kol Yisrael v'imru. Amen. Oseh shalom b'mromav, uyaseh shalom. Aleinu ve'al kol Yisrael ve'al kol yoshvei tevel v'imru. Amen. May God grant peace to those who mourn and comfort to all the bereaved among us. And we say, Amen. This concludes our service.